Welcome to the A-Dub Club, a podcast about sci-fi, fantasy, technology, pop culture, the internet, and general nerdery. There are three things that are important to know. One, we occasionally use swear words, but try to stay in the range of PG-13, or at least the kind of R the cool parents are fine with. Two, we may talk spoilers. In this particular episode, we discuss the 2003 Neil LaBute movie and play on which it's based, The Shape of Things, so be warned. And finally, three, most importantly, Paul Rudd's parents are British. With that out of the way, welcome to the clubhouse. We have snacks.
Hello, and welcome to the A-Dub Club. I'm Alex Wade.
I'm Andrew Whipple.
And today we have the long-awaited, most coveted, most requested by all of our listeners and viewers, our Shape of Things 2003 movie review starring Paul Rudd and Rachel Weisz. This has been a long one in the making, hasn't it, Whipple?
I know. We kept punting on it for a while, but I'm glad that we finally got around to actually doing it. We've waited long enough.
Yeah, the masses have been asking,
Yeah. Before we dive into it, how are you doing, Alex Wade?
I'm doing good. It's cold outside, and they put up like winter lights sort of things, on streets. I don't know if they do this in Chicago, but in New York, on some streets, they put up like these lights in between street lights sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it's kind of pretty. It's like right outside my window.
Oh, look at that. That's fun.
Yeah.
Does it give a nice little glow as it gets dark at 4 o'clock in the fucking evening?
Yeah, it is. It's 4:50 for me, and it is very dark outside. And this is one of the only sources of light out there.
Yep. 'Tis the damn season. But yeah. All right. Let's get into it.
Yeah.
Where do you want to take us first on this journey through cinema?
Yeah. First off, do we want to do spoiler-free?
Yeah, we probably
not
should.
spoiler-free version. Okay,
we probably should. I think it's only fair. I mean, I would anticipate that we can probably be pretty quick on the spoiler-free part because everyone's already seen this movie. But
True.
Just for the sake of the listener, in case there are anyone out there that haven't seen Shape of Things 2003.
Yeah, I mean, we all know. If you've listened to this podcast long enough and you're not a redhead, then I don't know what you're doing, But
and actually, to that end, maybe I can even start on. This week was actually the first time I saw the movie, which
really?
It's been a blind spot for me for a while. But I somehow made my way without having seen it until this week. So
yeah. I mean, me as well, actually.
Okay,
I do have to admit that.
Okay.
I mean, I guess, I'll start with a little introduction about it. So The Shape of Things is a play that was written by Neil LaBute, and then now it is also turned into a movie starring Paul Rudd, Rachel Weisz, and two other people who Google is telling me Gretchen Mol and Fred Weller. Gretchen Mol is semi-famous. No idea who the hell Fred Weller is, but...
Yeah, I feel like I'd seen him in some stuff. His face looked familiar as like a character actor kind of dude, but let me actually see what... Or continue going, and I will continue reading through his Wikipedia page to see what else he's been in.
For sure. Yeah. So the four of them were actually on, I'm pretty sure, the Broadway debut of Shape of Things. And then they just kind of, were the same characters in the movie. And it was directed, adapted to the screen by, and produced by Neil LaBute, which I think contributed to some of the problems. So spoiler-free, I guess, review of it for now. I really enjoyed it for sure. I mean, I can't not enjoy Paul Rudd, frankly.
True.
I can't name a single movie that I've seen Paul Rudd in where I am genuinely displeased by him.
Yeah, I would say the same thing for Rachel Weisz.
True.
Weisz. I don't know how you pronounce it. But yeah, I think those two in particular are like, oh, they're just never bad, huh?
Yeah.
Okay.
They're always pleasant, at least, That being said, there was a lot of qualities of this movie that were very clearly theatrical, or not theatrical in the sense of, oh, it's a film. Of course it's theatrical in the sense of the theater.
Yes.
There was a lot of kind of direct translations of scenes from the play into the movie that did not translate well.
Yeah.
They didn't try to make a movie out of it. They tried to adapt the stage into a movie, you know?
Mm-hmm. Which is something that's interesting. Like I can go both ways on it. Where I think that's a critique of a lot of, especially films that are like this, that are direct adaptations from plays. But also, I think that's something that is kind of tossed around of like a critique that can be made on movies that are made either by relatively inexperienced filmmakers or made by filmmakers who are, or it seems like a lot of times when that critique is made, it's meant to say, oh, this is a movie of a lot of people standing and sitting in rooms talking where not much happens and there's not much visually interesting that happens. I think is sort of what a lot of people mean when they say, oh, that movie felt like a play, or it felt like it was just filming a play. It is, however, I think something that can work really, really well in some circumstances, that, especially if, like me, I like watching people stand around talking a lot. But I think, the mere fact that it either is adapted from a play or even feels like it's a play doesn't necessarily need to be a knock against the movie.
Yeah.
If it can, I think a lot of Steven Soderbergh movies or Quentin Tarantino movies or stuff like that feel like have stage play elements to them, but they can still transcend that and to do what's the best part of theater and the best part of film together. I would agree with you, however, and we can get into it more when we get to the spoilery sections. I don't think this is one that sort of hits that same heights of like a Reservoir Dogs or a High Flying Bird or something like that. But it definitely makes for an interesting movie either way.
There are a lot of moments where it went from like, it was like a scene to scene movie that was the theatrical, or I guess I want a different word than theatrical, of a play.
Yeah.
Part of it that felt like to me of like, oh, this scene is going on for a long time unnecessarily. Like there's a lot of, I don't even know how to describe it.
Yeah, it feels like, actually that's a good point, where in most stage plays, especially most small stage plays that are made for small casts and stuff like that, generally speaking, you have long scenes in single locations that go, like an act might be made of 1 to 5 scenes that are each 5 to 30 minutes long. And that's by and large what happens in The Shape of Things, is you in a room for a long conversation, and then there's pacing and there's flow within that scene, but there's not pacing in the form of scene to scene to scene transitions. Unless the play is Macbeth by William Shakespeare, which has, I believe, 7 scenes in its first act, and it's one of the only ones that cuts that quickly in the Shakespearean canon.
Yeah, and it did not pay off in this for certain of that theatrical nature to it.
This is a total sidebar, but while we're on the subject of pacing of stage plays, what I've found in my own playwriting, which I haven't done any of in like 4 or 5 years, so to even say that it's a thing that I do is sketchy at best, but what I've historically found is I am very good at, I think, the pacing within scenes, and pretty bad at the pacing from scene to scene, to the point where almost everything I wrote, even like full lengths or long 45-minute one acts and stuff like that, almost always it would be one long scene as opposed to stuff that was broken up. So I can say I get the impulse, Neil. That doesn't necessarily mean it's the right decision, but
it definitely felt like coming from. I mean, I haven't obviously seen the play live, but there were moments when this felt like they were trying to just straight transfer the play from whatever it was on stage into the film.
Which, to that end, again, probably unnecessary, but the brief spoiler-free synopsis, I suppose, is, Paul Rudd, Rachel Weisz play the 2 main characters. Paul Rudd starts off as sort of a dorky college. They're both college kids, and Paul Rudd's sort of a dorky.
Are they? I thought they were like 25, 26, because she's a grad student.
Oh, okay, grad student then, yes.
Yeah, they were definitely, they're not supposed to be college kids. They're supposed to be like a little bit older.
Yeah. No. But Paul Rudd meets Rachel Weisz, who is, his name is Adam, her name is Evelyn. Interesting. I wonder why that might be the case. And she is a art student, and they meet at the museum where he is a security guard, docent, something like that and he interrupts her attempt at a little bit of light, artistically motivated vandalism, and then asks her out on a date and is very intrigued by the fact that him as sort of a schlubby guy, she seems to be pretty interested in him. And so then they start dating. And then over the course of them dating, he, starts to make some changes and seem to grow into a fuller version of himself in terms of new aesthetic choices. And then that's where the spoilers begin.
Yeah. And I had first read this play. I'd read the play, I guess, like 2 years ago in 2019. I was taking a monologue workshop and I got suggested this play. And so I read it to try and find a monologue from the perspective of Adam, which unfortunately the monologues that he had in there were not. There was one possibly that I could have memorized, but it was like not great. And that first turned me on to this play. At the time, like the thing about this play is I was pissed after reading it for a lot of different reasons. And I'm trying to say without being spoiler free right now, or without being spoilerific, but it like that's part of the point of it a little bit, I think, is to like make you question certain things. But even that in and of itself, I can't say this without spoiling anything. So I'm just going to save this for later then.
No, that's fair. That's fair. And I do get the sense, I have never, well, we were trying to look at it when we were talking earlier this week. I think I might have read some of Neil LaBute's short plays or scenes that are collected into, like a one-act collection or things like that. But I really don't have much experience with Neil LaBute in terms of having seen or read him. This is basically the first like long-form thing of his that I've had an interaction with. In Googling after the fact and sort of learning a little bit more about them, it does seem like, oh yes, he is sort of branded as the theater world's big misanthrope and big, like, I'm going to do a play that crystallizes towards some thing that I think is bad about the world and makes you question it in a hopefully very entertaining and engaging way. And so it does, based on both now knowing what I'm assuming that the play and the movie are fairly similar, but we can get into that.
Yes, they are.
We get into it. But now having some familiarity with the work, as well as then Googling and learning more about LaBute's reputation, it doesn't surprise me that this would be something that would leave you with that reaction at the end of it. And it seems sort of designed for that. To some degree or another.
Which that in it of itself is also part of the thing that pissed me off was the just very frustrating. I was just annoyed and irked by the play. But do you have anything spoiler for you else you want to say?
Yeah, I mean, I think top level, I'm glad that I watched it, especially because it was relatively short and the performances were good. I like Red and I like Vice, and it's a nice little. This feels like one of those movies that's like, this is a nice one to have in my back pocket as a thing that I've seen. World changing? No. Is it something that's like rocketed to the top of my recommendations list? No. Did I rank it like 3 out of 5 stars on Letterboxd, something like that? Yeah. But like, all right. Glad I watched it. Glad it got made. Like, I don't know. I like the idea of more movies like these just existing out in the ether. As options for the viewing and the creative public. Kind of strikes me as a little bit more maybe to that point of like stage playiness of like, is this one that probably more was gotten out of it from the people making it than, the broad audience, world audience? Maybe yes. But, and actually, if anything, the thing, I do wonder if I would have a different reaction and would feel a little bit more negative on it if it wasn't for the curiosity factor of, oh, I'm seeing this odd duck of a movie from 20 years ago, but the two leads are Paul Rudd and Rachel Weisz. I think the curiosity factor of that, I think definitely rises it in my estimation beyond the fact that they're just good performers and I kind of wouldn't want to see other people in it. But if it was like no names that were equally good, I don't know. I could see myself being more cool on this movie.
I had, when I had first read it, I like wanted to see it to kind of verify my thoughts and feelings around it after reading it, and seeing the movie definitely kind of confirmed what I was feeling at the time 2 years ago of just the, I don't know, arrogance. I don't know if that's the right word. We got to get to the spoiler part about this.
Yeah. I would say, let me take a look and see, of all of the various movies that we have covered on the ADub Club to this date, I would definitely say Rise of Skywalker is the worst. So watch this way, way, way before you watch Rise of Skywalker. However, basic, like, watch Arrival before you watch this. Watch Inside before you watch this.
Oh, yeah.
Watch Howl's Moving Castle, Detective Pikachu, Ad Astra. I would recommend this, but I would recommend it as it's short, it's a curio. Paul Rudd and Rachel Weisz are good in it.
Something that I will say about this, that after watching it, that I did gain a respect for it versus just reading it, was I am glad that the questions that it asks are being asked, and that I have strong opinions on the answer to them, but the fact that they're being asked is good.
I can see that. I will also say this movie's hard to find. Like I could not find it streaming anywhere. I couldn't find it renting anywhere. And then certainly chose to then buckle down and find another legal means to watch it, as opposed to finding anything online by searching The Shape of Things, watch online free. Definitely didn't do that. But yeah, it's so actually maybe that's another thing, is definitely a curio that I would recommend. However, hope that it comes on Netflix at some day or at Prime, and then you can skim by and be like, oh yeah, this would be a fun way to spend an evening.
It box off. So the budget was $4 million and the box office was like 800,000.
Yeah.
So not great.
Yeah. But of course, it made that up in home video over the last couple decades. Oh, I mean, obviously, everyone's talking about it, right?
True. I mean, yeah, it is our most requested movie review, obviously.
Yeah.
So
I still have to edit the Dune episode, or I still have to finish editing the Dune episode. Okay, spoilers. Let's go.
Okay, so spoilers. So the ending of the movie, the way how the whole movie goes is basically throughout the movie, Rachel Weisz is changing Paul slowly, like making him better, frankly, but also like doing some things that are like kind of questionable, of like, oh, like had him get a nose job. Didn't like force him, but like, you know, strongly suggested sort of things, and like,
yeah,
doing lots of things to him to make him better. It ends with, she mentions her thesis project throughout the film randomly. We have no idea what it is until the final scene or scenes where she reveals her thesis project turns out to be Paul Rudd himself, as he is her human sculpture that she has been sculpting throughout the course of the movie to improve upon and make better. And not necessarily make better, but just to impact, right? Like, for example, there's a time, like, against better judgment, she had said he, like, had a medical procedure that was completely unnecessary. But for the most part, the things that she does for him or to him, or however you say, are good things. But basically, she's saying my entire relationship with him was a sham. This engagement ring that he gave me a couple days ago is a testament to how real he thought it was. All this stuff. Basically saying this was all a fucking art piece. And then there's a scene in the end between her and Paul that is, he's like, you're a piece of shit. Fuck you, you C-word. How can you not realize that this is an awful thing that you've done? And she's like, aren't you happy that you have become a better person, that you lost weight, that you're more fashionable, that you're da-da-da-da-da, you're more confident now? And she's coming at this from the guise of, I am an artist, and anything I do for art is good, kind of.
Yeah.
And that's the question that I think is fundamentally posed in this piece of, like, how far can you take art? Like, there's literally there's a sign in the back of the thing of the studio that says moralists have no place in the art gallery, which I think is kind of the crux question of it. And there's also a scene in when Rachel is revealing her sculpture, when she literally, like, looks at the camera, like, holds both her fingers up and says, fuck you. And I definitely think her character is a stand-in for Neil LaBute, like, unquestionably. And, like, his opinion is that art for art's sake has no boundaries. And even though you kind of manipulated this guy, gaslit him, and emotionally destroyed him and made him fall in love with you, that's okay for the sake of art.
I think I might like this movie more now on hearing that discussion, specifically because the thing that was going to make me feel a little meh about the movie was the vibe towards the end where I was like, okay, but like, why is it so heavy-handedly on Paul Rudd's side and so heavy-handedly thinks that Paul Rudd is correct? And like, I was kind of, well, that's the thing. I was kind of coming out of it being like,
no,
okay, it like, why is it setting her up as this like straw man to like put this extreme counterexample that the audience is expected to, you know, be Team Paul by the end of it, was my read and my takeaway from it. And so if anything, I was kind of coming from the other side where it's like, oh, is it now? Maybe some of this is also me projecting way too much onto like the gender politics of it all and like making it easier for me to assume, okay, it's a 2003 movie by a acerbic playwright, and I have no experience with other plays, but like, is he putting the you know, Manic Pixie Dream girl character and the lovable everyman guy, and so it might have been that I was projecting into an assumed misogyny.
Which
may or may not. Which you talking about that though makes me think like, well, maybe that's actually counter intentional, and there's more twist to it. So I think I might like this movie more in the sense that one of my big knocks against it would have been that it felt too heavy-handedly like, okay, you are creating this fake scenario to, you know, pose a question, but then like you went too far in it and didn't like make it an actual even. The same critique that you were saying around like
in the opposite direction.
It's uneven, and it's like it's so obvious that you have one side that you support and one side that you don't, as opposed to having it be more.
I think
but I was taking it from the complete other direction.
Wow. Okay.
Which then maybe means like, okay, maybe it actually is better than I was thinking if the two of us can come away with it, assuming that. If we both assume equally strongly that, oh, yeah, it's a stand-in and a straw man are the two main characters, but we assume the roles are reversed, then maybe neither one of them are stand-ins or straw men. Maybe it actually is more nuanced than it seemed.
Yeah, okay, that's interesting. Yeah, I absolutely believe Rachel's character was the stand-in for Neil LaBute, of like him being like trying to pose this. I felt like he was trying to be this edgy teen posing this question of like, if you ruin and manipulate this person's life for the sake of your art sculpture, but it's a beautiful work of art, then like, that's okay. Yeah. I totally thought his perspective was that she is okay with what he was doing, what she was doing.
Yeah. And I think my take was that, plus how far it felt like she was pushed towards the point of parody and like to the extreme. Or I guess maybe actually the other take is like my read of the movie in terms of where my sympathies lay and where my thought on the actual morality of the acts in question was a like, oh yeah, she's an asshole. This is like this is totally unacceptable behavior on her part. And then maybe that is also coloring the fact that like, all right, if that was my take on it, and the fact that he is never once portrayed, despite the fact that he cheats on her, as having done anything super wrong, though maybe I am disagreeing with that even as I'm saying it, specifically thinking around the cheating front. Yeah.
I think a huge part of it is like, imagine gender roles being flipped, and it's so easy to see how much of this is beyond fucked up, is like is manipulative and abusive. Like, especially
which allegedly is a thing that happens in some. I was reading the Wikipedia, and it says like, if you do, people have done gender swap performances, and if you do, then you are supposed to use the names. Let me see, Amy and Evan instead of Adam and Evelyn.
Why? Just to have Eve still be the person who's manipulating?
I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, it's things like that. There's too much of this heavy-handed, like, I feel like so much of this work is him trying to be artsy and trying to be, I feel like
Adam and Eve makes me now re-question that, because, or under the assumption that it would be under the assumption that like, you can't get away with, and you wouldn't actually make the argument that Eve was in the wrong in the 21st century, obviously, because like, it's clearly that like, no, the biblical story of Eve is actually one where it's like, Eve is not or if you're an artsy liberal person, you wouldn't make an argument that Eve was in the wrong. But maybe even that is a double, triple turns out where it's like, well, everyone's therefore expecting that people wouldn't make the argument, or expecting that Eve must be in the right. So therefore I'm putting that forward to make
That's so much of this movie play just feels like I roll my eyes at Neil trying to give the benefit of the doubt to this fucking asshole. Like,
sure.
But then even me saying that is like, well, you're just playing into my hands as the artist, and like art isn't for you then, sort of thing, you know? Like that's that like that moment when she flicked off the camera and said fuck you.
Yeah.
And then and just she didn't feel any regret for anything she had done. Like the movie, in my opinion, clearly had the take. I guess you have the opposite opinion of that, like she was okay with what she was doing.
Oh, yes.
She is okay. Not she was okay. She is morally fine by doing that.
I totally agree with that.
That doesn't even matter.
I fully agree with that take. That like when we get to the end of the play, she shows no remorse and is genuine about having no remorse. He fucking hates her, but also kind of loves her and is genuine about that. But I think what I thought originally was the movie, and presumably therefore the play, is making the argument that even though she's genuine in her beliefs, she is wrong. And he's right, whereas yours was saying that the opposite, that the movie is making the argument that she is correct to feel this.
Especially with the way how the movie ended. Like the very specific, like, here's this one thing that I told you that was true. That was us whispering in bed together. And he's like, oh, you know? Like in the play when I had read that, and also I feel like I saw this in the movie of like, everything was fine then. Like it gave him some amount of closure, some amount of like satisfaction by hearing her say, oh, this one, whatever the thing is, because, you know, it's the thing inside the black case of Pulp Fiction, right? You don't need to know what it is, but it's important and meaningful to him. And like her giving that to him felt like justification, felt like, oh, everything's okay because A, he's a better person now. He's in shape. And like, even though he ruined his like years long friendships, and I've like, the thing about this is, imagine the same argument. I feel like the movie is trying to pose an argument, is posing the question around art being okay to certain extremes like this, right? Imagine if she had done shitty, awful things to him, and had made him a worse person, right?
Yeah.
Like, why? In theory, the movie would have the same opinion on that is still okay. Right.
Oh, like, yeah. So basically it's like there's two different arguments. There's the argument of, is anything okay if it's for the sake of art? And then there's the argument of, is it okay to have done these things given it actually made you better by objective measures? And in this, the two of them are conflated together because she's doing it for the sake of art and doing things that are quote unquote good for him.
Even though she's lying to him, manipulating him, and gaslighting him, right? Like those, like it is literally ends justifying the means in this situation, right?
Yeah.
But if the ends aren't good, then like, and arguably, like, oh, she broke up a marriage that just so happened to be on the rocks anyway, so it was fine that she broke it up, you know? Like, there's too many perfectly set up things in this that is trying to come to the conclusion around, like, you still did a shitty thing. Just because everything is sunshine and rainbows because you fucking wrote it that way doesn't make it okay.
Which, to that point, now that I hadn't thought about that element before, but now that you're saying that, if the argument of the play and the movie is no, she's actually wrong, then this is a good construction for that because it's basically painting the best possible version of it for her, for all the reasons that you just said of, well, actually, it made you better. Well, actually, that was a shitty relationship that should have been broken up regardless. Blah,
I still
blah,
can't
blah,
see how do you see that? Like, I can't see how you think she's in the right or wrong.
What I was going to say to finish that thought was, it's if the play is making that argument, then it's actually a pretty good version of that argument, or at least the most charitable possible version. That then the movie still says, yeah, even in this most charitable version, it's wrong.
Yeah.
If it's the other way around, which I think is sort of what you're getting at, it's like, well, if you're trying to argue that she's in the right, then you're doing the lazy version of it. You should stack the deck in the other direction and like let him go for the version that says, hey, if you could destroy the argument by that everything that you just said of like, well, what if she was doing bad things instead of good things, then it's a unsuccessful version of it.
I think the biggest problem with the play and therefore film is it's trying not to have an opinion. It's trying just to pose a question. And
I can see that.
And that is, in my opinion, an impossible task. Like your piece of work, it has to have an opinion. And like it does, in my opinion, it does. I feel like it tries to pretend like it doesn't have an opinion, but it definitely does. You know?
Yeah.
And it just feels so full of itself in that way, in that ending, like grandiose reveal of everything.
Yeah.
And then trying to be like, this is okay because it's a beautiful piece of art. Right?
Yeah.
Is what it's saying, in my opinion.
Yeah. Huh. Yeah, and that is one of the elements that feels arguably the most stage play outside of just the pure construction of long scenes that are mostly people talking, where it's like, oh yeah, that feels to me the way that a play would feel, in that like it builds to this larger than life thing that is extremely silly and insane, but played relatively straight in this kind of like lightly comedic, talky, light comedy format. It's like that part of it is one of the things that feels the most like, oh, I can see this on a stage, no problem. I could 1,000% understand why you're a college theater troupe. You want to fucking put on The Shape of Things because it's going to be a fun 4-person acting thing. It's going to let you at least explore some interesting ideas. It doesn't require any big set pieces. It
also
feels so stage play.
Rachel Weisz, she doesn't feel like a character. Like she doesn't feel like she had some moments of like I don't even know how to say that. Like the fact that she was lying the entire time. Like we never really caught on to that per se. Like there was this time when she would keep saying like she is an artist. That's all she is. And like, that's great. But there is still a human being that is there, you know?
Yeah.
It didn't feel like there was a human being behind the artist.
Yes, I would agree with that, I think. Some of that, I think, may be intentional in the sense of, or rather, it's the challenge that you have to have with any sort of piece that relies on deception on the part of a character is figuring out what is the balance between playing it completely straight and them being incredibly successful at their deception, including deception of the audience, which is the case in this one, versus trying to show off an element of the character behind the character. Yeah. And I think in this piece, it definitely took the tack of you could reasonably believe that every single thing that she did during the entirety of the movie up until the end was a lie and a performance, including maybe even, or a performance at the very least, maybe not necessarily a lie, including even the ending scene. You could still see as like, that is her being just as performative as she was at any other part, which that seems to be the tack that the piece is taking, which I think works conceptually, but is a little frustrating from the perspective of, I would like to see a character be a character at some point. It was they're the second lead.
She was trying to be, or the character is supposed to be like this kind of outside force who is observing this world, sort of thing that is like above everyone else in a way that is like trying. It was inhuman. Like
yes, totally.
And even beyond the fact of like, oh, the shitty things that she's doing. Like she just didn't have any growth over the entirety of the film. She didn't have any. She was the same person beginning to end, right?
Yeah, which I think I actually can be more okay with in the sense of,
but it wasn't a person.
What you were like in the sense of what you're talking about of like if she is,
like that's what they need for that part for that kind of for asking this question. That's what they need to have there. Right. But it's
exactly that's sort of what I was going towards was if you view it as Paul's or Adam's story, and she is this force of nature antagonist throughout it. She doesn't necessarily need to change or need to sort of reveal anything outside of her as a push and pull towards Paul and as a shaping function on Paul in the world. I keep saying Paul, Adam, in the world where you're sort of viewing this through the lens of it's Adam's movie and we're just treating her sort of as this force that acts upon him and that he interacts with, which the downside is I don't, especially if they're going to pose the question of is what she did right or wrong, and where the answer could theoretically be yes, what she did is right, then that's a poor structural choice to not. Well, actually, okay. As I'm saying that, I think it's a poor structural choice in the sense that I don't think it would be successful, but also I don't agree with her anyway. So I don't know if I would be swayed regardless. I can see an argument to be made for if you truly, truly believe that she's right, it is going to be more effective or in the same version of what we were talking about before around like, if you're going to make the argument, make the hard version of the argument. Don't make the easy version of the argument. The hard mode version of the argument is have her be this cipher that has no characterization. The easy mode version of the argument would be see the actual humanity within her. So I could kind of see an argument that could say, yeah, it's fine that she's the cipher, because if you still come down on her side, even though she's a cipher, that just shows how great Neil's argument is.
Sure.
But I also don't agree with the argument, and therefore it seems unsuccessful, and therefore that doesn't work on me. So
that's also in context of I've read some of his other plays of Reasons to be Pretty, and then the sequel to that of Reasons to be Happy, where that those plays are about kind of a Midwestern, like average town with average people sort of relationships. And this very much feels similar in the sense of like, oh, we have these three characters who are normal people with relationships and lives. And then this other character who is like artsy and is clearly stand-in for Neil, in my opinion. And I think that's what I disliked most about this, is it felt very condescending towards Adam, especially in that final scene. I just felt like Evelyn was kind of trying to be like, don't you get it, Adam? Like, you don't get the art. Why can't you just be happy with what I've done for you and enjoy the art piece? Like, wouldn't you just be as happy if you hadn't come today and you were just hoping for me to get home and say yes to your proposal or something?
Yeah. Yeah, and my take when I was watching that scene was like, yeah, but you're wrong. No, it's or the you being she is wrong.
Yeah. And the problem is he isn't smart enough to make the argument why she's wrong. And like that's built into the play. And
I like this. Okay. That I think actually might explain some of the difference in interpretation, in that totally agree with you, is that she makes her argument explicitly. He is not capable of being able to do that. And presumably is not capable of doing it. My take then was, yes, however, the surrounding circumstances and the mere fact of I just watched what happened, and also I'm watching Paul Rudd be a puppy dog, or a puppy dog that is now turned hard-hearted in this last moment, as for me reading like, yeah, he can't make the argument, but that doesn't mean the argument isn't there and isn't saying like, and also the fact that no one else went, well, see, even that I could see taking both ways. The way that I read the fact that he was the only one that came to her Q&A and saw the rest of the thing was, the way I read it was part of piling on that idea that like, no, she went too far, she was wrong. I could 1,000% see, though, as I'm saying that out loud, the alternate argument could be these fucking plebeians don't get it, and they are moralists who are wrong. So
yes, that's how I take it. It's even more of him being a fucking petulant child, being like, you just don't understand my art, okay? Like, fuck you, assholes. I'm better than you. You just don't get what I'm coming from. And him like writing a fucking play about it, about how people don't get his art, you know? Like,
yeah, what I will say is fun about this, and I think we still can have more time to talk through. So maybe this
Sure.
changes by the end of it. I'm assuming 0% of anything that I have said has convinced you, and 0% of what you have said has convinced me, which I think is cool, and I like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I'm still, yeah. So you really think that Neil is like he's making the argument in the opposite direction? I still
okay. So actually.
Do you think he's just trying to pose the question, or do you think he has an opinion on it? Because I think I think he's trying to pose a question and pretend like he doesn't have an opinion on it, but is like holding your hand to what he believes.
Yeah, I guess maybe now I'm kind of like 33%, 33%, 33% on the actual opinion of the piece is she's in the right, versus the actual opinion is that he's in the right, versus the actual opinion is, oh, I'm just posing the question, but secretly I think one of the other two and it's sneaking out, even though I'm trying as hard as I can to make it be neutral. So maybe when I said that like nothing what you're doing is nothing that you've said convinced me and nothing that I said convinced you is more that I cannot shake the read that I had, but I could see a world where, or especially now knowing more about Neil, I could see a world where if Neil LaBute came out today and said, oh yeah, no, totally, Evelyn's right, fuck all of you guys, then I'd be like, all right, I guess that makes sense. As opposed to when I was immediately finished watching the movie, I was like, wow, this is like so heavy-handed in favor of Paul Rudd.
Interesting. I just, even the very last moment, like why does she tell him that like, hey, that thing that I said was true?
I took that as more argument in favor of him that like, oh, well, see, there was some element of this that was kind of true. And actually, like, yes, I'm trying to pretend like I'm this great artist, but really there was something at least,
human.
Or at least I feel the need in this moment to give you a taste of like what you're trying to look for rather than sticking to my convictions as like, nope, the art's the only thing that matters.
So she was lying again?
She was either way. Either she was, I think my read originally was that she wasn't lying, but both of them, I think, or I could see an interpretation of her lying or an interpretation of her telling the truth that could fit in with my view of it's her betraying the art is the only thing that matters.
Gotcha. Interesting. Okay.
I actually like better, or I think the version that fits my read better and I would prefer and I think is cleverer would be the one that she's lying even in that moment. But I don't know if that's true or not.
I just wanted them to make her a real person. Like,
yeah. Because it's the thing that like so one thing that I was trying to think when you were mentioning before on the like, she's not a real character. She's just a force of nature. She's just something that's like making stuff happen around. That is a thing that can totally work. And the thing that it was making me think of, I'm assuming you've never seen this movie and I'm assuming you probably never will, but the movie Funny Games by Michael Haneke, where it's a home invasion movie of a sort, but basically these two random guys just like show up and take this family prisoner hostage in their house and then like toy with them and play games with them for like the entirety of the movie. And they even break the fourth wall and talk to the audience. There's a whole scene where like one of the women starts to get away and then the guy finds the TV remote and then points it at the camera and then rewinds back to earlier in the scene to prevent her from getting away. Like very meta. And these two characters are like totally cartoon character, just pure evil.
Sure.
And thing like that.
Very different.
Exactly. Well, and like that what I was going to say is like that can work when that is building to and is the point of what the argument, like the argument I think of Funny Games is this nihilistic, like nothing fucking matters kind of thing. And having characters like that are purely stand-ins for that argument can totally work if it fits in with that argument that you're making. However, I don't think it works as well in this case. Or rather, I could see an argument that it could work well if you're saying, this is me playing on hard mode. But if you're saying this is me playing on hard mode, then you wouldn't do all the other stuff in the play around like, oh, well, actually all the stuff that I did was good for you if you think about it.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like those things are just trying to make you more sympathetic towards towards Eve or Evelyn. Yeah. And like, that's,
I will also say it'd be interesting, since I never read it, I only saw the movie. It'd be interesting what it's like on the page, specifically because both Paul Rudd and Rachel Weisz, I think, are really, really good actors.
Yeah.
Rachel Weisz, I can't, from other stuff that I've seen in her, I see her as someone who is really good at like doing sort of larger than life exaggerated characters, but then you get those moments to be able to peer within them. This movie doesn't give her the option to do any of that, but like the sort of caricature, or not caricature, but very performative character that she plays throughout the rest of it is like, yep, I've seen her do stuff like that in different directions and she's really good at it. But in other movies like Brothers Bloom, Black Widow, The Favorite, you then get to see peering beneath the surface at other elements. Paul Rudd, I feel like, is someone who like never doesn't feel like a person, just in, at least when I see him. And so I'm curious how much of actually in your experience, how much of this feeling of she is just a cipher and he's more of a real person came through on the page versus how much came through from the performances of Weisz and Rudd?
It was very much from the page, from the get-go of I had this feeling. And I was that, so when I first saw this, I was excited to see it. Obviously classic 2003 film. I had like, I came into this expecting my opinion to change drastically because I was like, the page would be very different than the film, and like the lack of humanity in Rachel Weisz's character. I did see, she was less of a cipher per se, but still very similar to the page. And,
got it.
Yeah,
that makes sense.
We've mainly just spent this entire time talking about the philosophical question that was posed, which like I think is great. Like that's the thing that I do like about this movie and the play is the fact that it poses this question in the first place. I want more kind of material like this, but it needs to be A, better done, and B, it has to have I think it needs to have a distinct opinion. Like I do think this had a distinct opinion about it, but it was trying not to. And like, that's, I just, art like that. I've read from the other plays that I've read by Neil LaBute, like he does that a lot. And I don't think I like it. Like in Reasons to Be Happy, first off, there's a bit of male fantasy, like, the main character has two women and he has to choose between one of them because one of them is, he's just new, and the other one is he has a lot of history with and just fell in love with again.
Interesting.
Yeah. Guess what?
Fun.
That guy character.
Interesting. I wonder what that would possibly be like to have a bunch of history with someone and then fall in love with them again after a long period apart. Can't possibly imagine that.
It's impossible. Who could tell, But that character was also definitely a stand-in for Neil LaBute. And the question that was being posed in that play was more like, what is the right decision to make for yourself versus other people? And it was like trying to ask some sort of question again, but like I couldn't really tell what it was. And it just had this very similar feeling of the end of it, of being like, I don't know, trying to impart some sort of wisdom in a way on the audience, that very much in Shape of Things felt like the end of this too. Like art is good, or whatever the fuck it's trying to say, right? That we've been talking about for the past 50 minutes. Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting. I do want to read more Neil LaBute at some point, if only because he's one of the handful of modern canonical artists who get produced and writes things frequently. So if only for it being a blind spot, but I don't know. It does seem like, to your point of, is this the best example of this style that I've ever seen? No, not by a long shot. Am I glad this kind of style exists and is at least popular enough that, he's able to go write more plays like this and able to get them produced into movies? at some point. Yeah, sure. I'd rather this kind of stuff exist than not, even if I would rather a better version of it.
Yeah. I don't know. I can't really think of like the inception of this kind of style of movie per se.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that is, I mean, all art proposes questions, right? But I don't even know how to describe this style versus others.
Yeah, I don't know. Because, so there's an idea, which I don't know if I fully believe it, but it's an interesting thought exercise from one of my screenwriting teachers in college. He didn't like the idea of, or when you talk about, what's the theme of a piece and blah, 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 he really bristled at the idea that like most people, when they think about theme, what they actually are talking about is like images or like symbols or stuff like that, where it's like I actually wrote a tiny letter that was about this. So let me see if I can pull up the example. But it would be like, the theme of Lord of the Rings is heroism or something like that.
Sure.
And he's like, no. Sure, there's heroism in Lord of the Rings, but like that's not important. That doesn't tell you anything. He would think of theme as the theme of a piece is the answer to a question that's posed by the piece. And so he would reframe it as like the theme of Lord of the Rings is who gets to be a hero? Answer, anyone, even the smallest and most blah, blah, around it. And so in that view, and we would talk about that in the case of, it was a screenwriting class, but it was more sort of that script analysis class than anything. And it was a lot of like breaking down the structures and the arguments and the themes and stuff like that of, a dozen odd movies over the course of the semester. And so in that view, he was basically saying like all good art should have some version of that like there is some question it's posing and some answer that it's giving to that question. But the way that you go about this, like there's a big difference in a lot of different ways, but difference in the way that theme gets expressed in a Lord of the Rings, where it's like tied into this broader narrative and blah, 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 versus something like this that is more around like, I am constructing a scenario in a petri dish, in a diorama to say, hey, act out the argument that I want you to act out for me, please. And I'm going to construct false characters, for lack of a better word, to go and express that. I need to read more Brecht. I get the vibe that Brecht is big into that same kind of thing of like, have a bunch of fake characters and have them be deliberately audience hostile and have them go act out your thesis rather than act out stories. But I've only read Mother Courage once and bounced off it incredibly hard, and that was a decade ago. So I don't know if that's the thing. If that's a fair assessment of Brecht.
Like I enjoy these. I enjoyed the play movie, obviously, but I feel like I can only take this stuff for so long because it feels more like it's, instead of a piece of entertainment or something to affect you, it is more meant to ask you questions and like philosophically challenge you, more than that. That feels like the first purpose of this film, not the performance of the actors.
100%. And I think I agree with you in terms of the personal preference angle. There is part of me that is very interested.
It's great. I think there should be more of these, but yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. That's interested in, or I love the idea of anyone having philosophies of what art should or shouldn't be, or what they want art to be. And especially if those philosophies conflict with each other, and like, for as much as I don't personally enjoy what little Brecht I've interacted with, I'm super into the idea that like, here is a person who has a concrete philosophy of like, art should do this thing, and the thing I think art should do is different than what everyone else thinks that art should do. Not just of having those different opinions, but being at the level of formalizing those opinions, of saying everyone else just like are making these assumptions. I'm going to go and say, actually, no, let's be concrete about this is what my assumptions are. This is what your assumptions that you're not saying are. And also, I think I'm right and you're wrong. I dig that conceptually, even if I don't necessarily, that doesn't match with my own personal preferences. So I think, I'm in the same place that you're at around like, glad that this sort of stuff exists, glad to interact with it. There's better versions of this kind of thing, or ones that fit more within the styles and preferences that I have around art and art's ability to influence philosophical argumentation. But Yeah, no, glad it exists. Not my favorite kind of thing, but cool.
Yeah.
And Paul
Also,
Rudd is fun.
If you just look at the idea of the film in general, of like someone incepting thoughts and behaviors into someone else's minds and how to change them, like gender flipping it would so very clearly, you'd be like, oh, this is an abusive relationship, like just so fucking clearly, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, it's true.
Yeah. It's like, okay, oh, that's why this is bad, is because it's, you know, abusive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a very good point. Well, and actually, yeah, because that does get into the question or argument that is being made. If you take the argument of good art is worth doing bad things, is that a universal truth, or if the play was able to successfully convince you that the Evan character is right, even in the gender flipped version, then like that's a really, really strong argument on behalf of the idea that yes, anything is worth the art. However, it sort of implicitly, to your point, for almost all audience members would trigger the, no, not everything. In fact, this thing, not this, please. Yeah. Because especially now when we're understandably, justifiably, correctly more sensitive to those notions of power dynamics and relationships and how those cross-cut along gender lines.
Yeah.
Which is an interesting, I mean, this is going way off topic, but a version of the argument made in The Shape of Things would be, I know there's a lot of conversation around like, the Jeremy Strong thing, which is recent at the time that we're recording, which means it's probably going to be like 3 months late by the time that it's released. But the whole brouhaha around the Jeremy Strong profile from a couple weeks ago, that was starting off with people being like, Jeremy Strong is really good in Succession. Then the profile comes out and the profile talks about like how methody he gets and how intense he is on set and how like, sounds like that might be a very unpleasant person to work with when he's in this zone and when he's in this mode. And it's like, okay, well, is that worth the performance if that's what he needs in order to get
one's
performance?
Fascinating for me.
Is that worth it or not? And then the other thing that's really interesting was then the next week, the Succession season finale comes out. And one of the things that they talk about in the profile was specifically a moment where like he decided on like the 9th take of a scene, you know what, in this moment, I need to sit down and sit down in the dirt and in the dust because that's what my character would be feeling like. And then they point out, that ruins the continuity. We can't use any of the other 9 takes because now there's like dirt on his pants. And there's and so like, a lot of people talking about like, that sucks. That's bad. He should be more professional. And then everyone watches the scene and they're like, holy shit, this is fucking incredible. He's super, super good. That's super necessary. That was the better choice. And then people stop talking about Jeremy Strong. But
I mean,
the broader conversation, of like what kinds of behavior and professional or unprofessionalism, if it leads to good art, is it worth it or not?
That's something fascinating because I've heard that argument towards like people like Steve Jobs or, you know, other super shitty geniuses and like tolerating their genius and unprofessionalism for the sake of their genius, that I, in the tech world, very firmly come down on. It's like, no, fuck assholes. In the acting world, like, I don't know. Like, there's obviously limits. There's definitely limits. Like, you don't need to send used condoms, as Jared Leto did to other members during Suicide Squad. That's just being a fucking asshole.
Mm-hmm.
But, like, I know nothing about this Jeremy Strong's thing, but sounds like he did a great job. And, you know, that's art sometimes. There's a lot of professionalism doesn't apply the same way towards art that it does towards real life, which I think is like a tenth of the argument that's being made in Shape of Things.
What do you mean by that?
Of like doing shitty things for the sake of good art, like how acceptable is it, sort of thing.
Okay. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Like,
and I again, because this is sort of a like taking it in a side tangent version that we can't be expected to have fully formed thoughts around. But yeah, I guess the Shape of Things version I come down fairly firmly, also because it's a bad art project. It's not actually
for sure.
Art,
yeah,
is the other part of it. Maybe that's also why I felt like the movie was arguing that he was in the right, because I was like, your art's bad. Like, this is very, like, I would roll my eyes and, like, walk out of the
yeah.
But
yeah,
the Shape of Things one, I think I feel very strongly. It's like, yeah, that's a...
Oh, you manipulated a lonely man with sex and love? Oh, sure. Let's call that art. Okay. Like,
also consensual sex tape, but consensual sex tape that they explicitly talk about the fact that, like, no one else is going to see this, and then she shows it in her gallery, which bad. Let's not do that one, please. Anything else on The Shape of Things, 2003, directed by Neil LaBute, from the play of the same name by the same author?
The performances were decent. I know we didn't really talk much about, like, anything before the final 20 minutes of the film, but
True.
but that's fine because the rest of the film is just a setup for that. So
yeah, that was another thing that did feel very play-like, is like the dialogue throughout it is that sort of heightened, lightly comedic, bouncing back and forth, or the kind of dialogue that you have when the expectation is dialogue will be the entirety of the runtime, in a way that I'm a sucker for. So I was into it.
Yeah. It was good. Shape of Things.
It's
decent.
It's decent. Yeah. I'm glad we finally got around to it. If only to be able to check it off the checklist.
But silence the haters out there who say we don't listen to them. Like, we read your emails, guys. Every last one, you know?
Yeah. If you have suggestions for the next Neil LaBute movie that we should add onto the queue and watch for the AW Club, you can, of course, email them. Well, you already have our email because you already have been blasting us about The Shape of Things, but you can email us at theawclub@gmail.com. That's THEAWCLUB@gmail.com. You can also get in touch with us on Twitter at the AW Club. That's at THEAWCLUB. You can, of course, find our podcast wherever podcasts are found, whether that's Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or Google Podcasts. And you can, of course, go to our website, theaw.club. That's THEADUB.CLUB. And there you can find our topics guide, where we have a list of all the different things that we've done episodes on in the past. There you'll be able to find, finally, after much cajoling, a nice The Shape of Things link there. And that can take you directly to this episode. A nice Neil LaBute one that will take us to this and all of our other Neil LaBute episodes. And you can also find our starter guide, which is a list of a handful of episodes that we think are particularly good ones that we would recommend if you want to try out the rest of the club and the clubhouse. And I believe that is everything, as my voice is starting to go.
Fantastic. You got COVID now. AW Club out.
AW Club out. As a side note, this was a fun when my girlfriend and I were watching Tick, Tick, Boom, and having the realization over the course of the movie is like, oh, the girlfriend's kind of in the wrong. This is weird to be like, normally what I would expect from a movie like this is that, like, the girlfriend is right and he's pushing himself too hard and being too distant. And it's like, actually, no, she's kind of not being fair to him in these moments and, like,
really
behaving kind of badly.
I disagree.
Conversation for us to have.
What?
Just from the lens of, like, well, and actually in particular, it was they should have broken up no matter what. I don't feel that they were not a good relationship together, but
sure.
Particularly it was hey, I want to talk to you about this job opportunity. By the way, I already applied, and I already got it, and I need to say yes. And then the later one when she was like, in particular, well,
I wanted you to ask me to stay. Like, you shouldn't put that expectation on someone.
Exactly,
you should.
Exactly. No, should they be together? No, absolutely not. It's good that they broke up. But I was like, well, it is not entirely, we were both of the opinion that it's like, weirdly, he's kind of coming out more in the right than she is.
I think she made some mistakes, but for the most part, like, they needed to have a 5 to 10 minute conversation, that he kept pushing off and was shitty of him. And, like, for that matter, like, she couldn't have told him these things because that was the point of the conversation, was to have these to talk about these things that she couldn't have told him. So
okay.
This is so fucking far off topic, but yeah.
Absolutely. So this has been our review of Tick, Tick, Boom, the Lin-Manuel Miranda 2021 Netflix movie. I'd wholly recommend it. You should, you should definitely add that one to your queue.
Yes. Not as good as Shape of Water, though. You know, bestiality is only a sin if you believe it is. You know.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Where did you get Shape of Water from? Out of any of this?
Shape of Things, Shape of Water.
Yes, that's true. What if the things were water? What if the water was things?
Yeah.